The Syrian Arab Republic's delegation, al-Ibrahimi, and the so-called opposition coalition delegation held a new session of talks in Geneva. Lavrov affirms that terrorism in Syria represents a dangerous threat that must be fought, as Iran strongly criticizes the American decision to rearm terrorists in Syria. The Iraqi tribes delegation asserts the Iraqi people's solidarity with Syria. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Irado Krikorian with the news in English. The morning session of talks between the Syrian Arab Republic's delegation, the UN Envoy to Syria, Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi, and the delegation of the so-called opposition coalition has been concluded, according to our news correspondent to Geneva too. The Syrian Arab Republic's delegation presented its reply to the intervention made by the so-called opposition coalition delegation yesterday. The news correspondent said the Syrian Arab Republic's delegation has agreed to Geneva 1 with some reservations, affirming that the delegation has come to Geneva 1 out of keenness on the Syrian blood, freedom and democracy. The Syrian Arab Republic's delegation has declared from the very beginning its full readiness to put Geneva 1 on the table and discuss all its items, one after the other, starting from paragraph 1. The Syrian Arab Republic's delegation drew the attention of the so-called opposition coalition delegation to the fact that the latter has only read item 8 of the Geneva 1 statement, ignoring what is before and after it. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned against the spread of terrorism in Syria, stressing the necessity of combating it. Answering a question put by a Safir correspondent in Brussels, Lavrov pointed out that combating terrorism in Syria is one of the main tasks of Geneva II conference, recalling that the Geneva I conference called on both the government and opposition to unify efforts to expel the terrorists or eliminate them. He added that he felt an increasing understanding on the part of Russia's European partners during the discussion of this topic, criticizing harshly the flow of weapons into terrorists in Syria. Lavrov, on the other hand, stressed during his meeting with Archbishop Yohanna X Yazigi of Antioch and all the Orient for the Greek Orthodox that Russia is exerting huge efforts for the release of the kidnapped archbishops in Syria, Paul Yazigi and Yohanna Ibrahim. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs Hussein Amir Abdullahian stressed that the U.S. new decision on rearming terrorists in Syria constitutes a big strategic mistake. In a statement to the Iranian news agency, Abdullahian reiterated that the U.S. contradictory behavior coinciding with the Geneva II conference proved that Washington had no plan for solving the crisis in Syria. He stressed that the suffering of the Syrian people could not be solved by supporting the terrorists and the armed terrorist groups, rejecting any military solution to the crisis in Syria. He described the Geneva II conference as a political game, indicating that taking part in the conference and supporting the terrorists at the same time could not help put an end to the humanitarian crisis in Syria. He called for adopting a political solution based on democratic means and holding elections to solve the crisis in Syria. Welcome back. The Syrian Arab Army has entered Azara village and the farms surrounding Tel Kalakh countryside in Homs, eliminating terrorist groups including non-Syrians. The Syrian Arab Army units had earlier started to pursue the armed gangs in the area, destroying terrorist hideouts and advancing through several axes to encircle Al-Burj district, considered to be the largest bulwark of the armed men in that area. A Salafi leader, Abu Qatada, and all the members of his group have been eliminated. The Syrian Arab Army has eliminated several terrorists and destroyed their arms and ammunition in Qadi Askar, Karm Miyassar, Al-Marj, Bustan al-Qasr, Al-Rashidin and Al-Jazmati in Aleppo city. The Syrian Arab Army has also destroyed terrorist hideouts in the towns and villages of Jdeide, Queris, Sheikh Najjar, Daret Azza, Al-Atarib, Ma'arit al-Artiq, Al-Wudayhi and Azzan. Several armed men were killed or wounded. The Iraqi tribes delegation has arrived at Damascus International Airport, headed by Mr. Muhammad al-Tabtabai, to convey the Iraqi people's solidarity with the Syrian people, army and leadership in the face of the assault to which they have been exposed to for the past 3 years. The tribe's sheikhs have affirmed that the Syrian Arab Army has been defending in its war against terrorism not only the Syrians but the Arabs and humanity as a whole. The delegation will be carrying out several visits to be briefed on the events in the country and the victories realized thanks to the cohesion between the army and the people in Syria. In Iraq, Major General Marid Abdul Hassan, Director of Tribal Affairs at the Iraqi Minister of Interior, has affirmed that the Iraqi government will not confer with the terrorists who have come from abroad to declare a so-called Islamic State in the governorates of Iraq. He added that the tribes in Al-Ramadi and Al-Fallujah have given the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Levant organization a lesson not to be forgotten. The Iraqi official from Kirkuk stressed that there is no room for killers on the soil of Iraq. The Iraqi army has, on the other hand, cleared Al-Bufarraj district from Al-Qaeda terrorists, killing 60, wounding 269 and capturing 50 others. The Iraqi forces have meanwhile continued their operations in Al-Mal'ab district. Finally, the Egyptian armed forces renewed stress on the efforts of army and police in their war to uproot terrorism and the Takfiri groups who threaten the security of Egypt. The Egyptian army criticized the criminal acts by the so-called Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis of targeting mosques and churches in violation of all human values. The terrorist group had earlier claimed responsibility for blowing a gas pipeline and the assassination of Mohammed Saeed, a top general in the Interior Ministry. With this we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Vani Genjan, but after a short break.
Good afternoon. The Cabinet agreed to allow the general establishment of cement to directly sell the bagged cement by 25% of the product, and also allow the establishment of Omran to directly sell the bagged cement by 75%. Director of the cement establishment said that the approval aims to sell the whole product of the sub-companies in collaboration with the establishment of Omran. Minister of Internal Trade stressed that the Chambers of Industry, Trade and Crafts should commit to the decision taken by the Ministry concerning subjecting food and some non-food items to the policy of pricing and cancelling their exemptions from profit rates. The Minister called on preparing cost data for the materials that they deal with. State Ministry for Investment Affairs gave its directives to complete the notes taken by the General Investment Commission to amend the proposed draft law in order to keep up with the requirements of the current situation in Syria and to suit the phase of reconstruction, so that this draft law would be submitted to the Higher Council of Investment. Damascus Securities Exchange closed high yesterday, rising from the previous session. Trading amounted to more than 33,000 shares that were distributed among 36 deals. The price of oil fell, dragged down by expectations of rising crude inventories and a further cut in U.S. central bank stimulus. Oil prices have been underpinned by the Fed stimulus because it has kept the dollar from strengthening, making oil more affordable for traders using other currencies. Global stock markets stabilized after 3 turbulent days when investors grew worried about growth in China and other developing economies. The Standard & Poor's 500 index rose more than 10 points, whereas the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 90.68 points. Gold rallied to a 5-month high last week as a global flight from emerging market assets and equities declines increased bullion buying. Spot gold was down 0.4%, while platinum prices fell. The dollar pushed higher as stocks recover in Europe, with the move partly fueled by stop orders, as the market is being mindful of the FOMC announcement tomorrow that is widely expected to announce a further tapering. With this, we conclude our news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.